You know, we all run on what we call common sense, right? Don't touch a hot stove. Look both ways before you cross the street. Stuff like that. But what about our common sense ideas about how society works? What if I told you that a lot of what we think we know is just wrong? Today, we're going to peek inside the Sociologists' toolkit and see how they separate the facts from the fiction. So this is really the big question that gets the whole thing started. Is what seems totally obvious actually true? We've all got these gut feelings and assumptions about the world, but sociology, well, it challenges us to dig a little deeper, to look for the real evidence hiding underneath the surface. And that right there is the whole mission. It's about taking those common sense ideas we all have, putting them under the microscope, and really seeing if they hold up. The goal is to move from just, I think this is true, to, okay, I can actually prove this, swapping out those gut feelings for cold, hard evidence.
So how do we actually go about doing that? How do we get from just having a hunch about something to a real, solid finding? Well, it all starts with having the right tools for the job.
Think of this next part as a tour of a sociologist's workshop. And probably the most common and one of the most powerful tools you'll find in there is the survey. I mean, at its core, a survey is super simple. You just ask people questions to get information. I'm sure you've taken tons of them in your life. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, this is where things get a little tricky. See, the way you ask a question can totally change the answer you get. Just a tiny little change in the phrasing can send your data in a completely different direction. It's kind of a delicate art, but it's also a very precise science. Okay, so this is where you can really see how much the wording matters. For example, if you ask a group of people, how tall is this building? You're going to get a much higher average answer than if you ask, how short is this building? That one word, tall versus short, frames the entire question. These are called leading questions, and they can either accidentally or sometimes intentionally nudge people toward a specific answer.
So, to get around that problem, researchers have to be really careful. They usually choose between two main types of questions. Open-ended questions are like essay questions. They let people give you these rich, detailed answers in their own words. And then you have closed-ended questions, which are more like multiple choice. They're way easier to count up and analyze, but they also limit what people can say. Each one has its own job, really, depending on what you're trying to find out.
But, surveys have their limits. What people say they do and what they actually do, well, those can be two very different things. That's why sociologists sometimes have to ditch the spreadsheets and get out into the real world. It's called field research, and it's all about observing people living their lives in their natural settings to get a truly authentic picture of what's going on. Okay, let's pause here, because we're about to hit the absolute golden rule of all social research. Seriously, if you only remember one thing from all this, make it this next part. Say it with me. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. It sounds so simple, but it is one of the most important ideas you need to understand the world, and especially to avoid getting fooled by misleading headlines and stats.
So, what does that actually mean? And why is this one little phrase so incredibly important for anyone looking at news reports or statistics or pretty much any kind of data?
Okay, it's pretty simple when you break it down. Just because two things happen at the same time or seem related doesn't mean one caused the other. Think about the classic example. In the summer, ice cream sales go up, and so do shark attacks. Are they correlated? Yep. But does eating ice cream cause shark attacks? Of course not. There's a third thing, hot weather, that's causing both. It's the same logic here. Maybe you ate ice cream the night before a test and you did badly. That's a correlation. But the ice cream didn't cause you to fail. Maybe you were just tired or, you didn't study enough. Those are the more likely causes.
So if you really want to find out what actually causes something, you can't just look at two things happening together. You have to design an experiment that can zero in on one single factor and test its impact. You got to untangle all the messy, connected parts of social life to see what's really making things happen. Let's see how they do that.
All right, so let's put all this theory into practice. We're going to walk through a super famous experiment that shows perfectly how researchers test for what causes what. And this one looks at a powerful and often totally invisible force, the pressure to conform.
Real research isn't just a shot in the dark. There's a process, a roadmap that scientists follow, and it looks a lot like this. You start with a problem, you make an educated guess, which we call a hypothesis, and then you follow a really systematic plan to collect and analyze your data to find the answer.
So, in our case, the problem was this. How much does pressure from a group mess with our own judgment?
The hypothesis, the educated guess, was that people would probably just go along with a group's opinion, even if that opinion was obviously wrong. To test that, the researchers had to isolate the cause and the effect.
First up, you've got the independent variable. The easiest way to think about this is that it's the one thing the researchers are changing on purpose to see what happens. It's the cause they're testing. So in this experiment, the independent variable was that social pressure, which they created by having a bunch of actors all give the same, clearly wrong answer to a simple question.
And if the independent variable is the cause, then the dependent variable is the effect that you're measuring. Its value depends on the independent variable. In this case, the dependent variable was the answer given by the one real person in the room who wasn't an actor. The big question was, would their answer change based on the pressure from the rest of the group?
And what they found was, wow, it was pretty mind-blowing. A whole lot of people just went along with the group's obviously wrong answer. But, and this is so important, if just one other person in the group gave the right answer, conformity just plummeted. And when people were allowed to write their answers down in private instead of saying them out loud, conformity almost completely vanished. It's such a cool look at how powerful social pressure is, but also how fragile it can be.
So this behavior, this going along with the group, it has a name. It's called conformity. It just means changing your behavior to match what a group expects. But why on earth do we do it?
Well, researchers figured out there are two main reasons. The first is called informational conformity. That's when we go along because we start to doubt ourselves. We think, man, if they all see it that way, maybe they're right and I'm the crazy one. But the second reason is normative conformity. This is when we know the group is wrong, but we go along anyway because we don't want to rock the boat. We're afraid of being the odd one out.
And this is why it all matters. This is the whole point. Our common sense tells us that we're independent thinkers, that we're in charge of our own choices. But what this kind of careful research shows us is that we're all being pushed and pulled by these powerful, invisible social forces all the time. This isn't just something that happens in a lab. This explains everything from why bad ideas go unchallenged in a corporate boardroom to how a single juror with a different opinion can change a verdict.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. When you look at your own life, at your job, with your friends, your family, when do you find yourself just following the group? And what does it take for you to be the one to stand alone?